Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again. Dave here at Ground Zero, here to take you through some of your isolation with another segment of what we call Interestingly Enough. Now, our segment was named by Carl Fulmer, so when I got a note from Carl saying, SpiderGwen, go Spider, whatever her name is, I'd like to know more about her. We got to do this. Carl, you got it. SpiderGwen is an insanely popular character. But to talk about Spider-Gwen, we've got to go back and talk a little about Spider-Man, and that pushes us down the rabbit hole to 1962. Don't worry, I'll make this as quick as I can. Everybody ready? Okay, 1962, Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, with a little introductory help from Jack Kirby, create the character of Spider-Man. He premieres that same year in Amazing Fantasy 15 and is an instant hit. Now, 1962 is also the year that U.S. military advisors in Vietnam increased from 900 to 12,000. Now, I bring this up because a lot of change is on the horizon. Things are changing for the country. Now, up to that point, superheroes were square-jawed, manly men who knew right from wrong, and they were going to do it no matter what got in their way. That dame on their side, she was just there to save occasionally. Nobody was going to stop them from doing good deeds. Confidence was not a problem. But coming out of the 50s, America was a little less sure of exactly who we were at that point. The world was changing so much around us. Bay of Pigs in 1961, social unrest, women's liberation. We just weren't quite so sure exactly who we were anymore. Now, one thing we were sure of is with great power comes great responsibility. You might have heard this before. So Spider-Man. Stan Lee immediately, with this big hit on his hands, starts fleshing out the supporting cast. Aunt May, Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, but more importantly, the two girls that were going to play a big part in Peter Parker's life. In Amazing Spider-Man 25, Mary Jane Watson, red-haired, exciting, vivacious, always up for fun and a party. Very much an interesting character. 6 issues later, Gwen Stacy, blonde, super nice. And that's about it, really. But as it would turn out, she became Spider-Man's primary love interest, and that held with a few hiccups pretty much solid for the next 10 years. So now we're up to 1973. See, I told you I would get you through this pretty fast. By 1973, a lot of big changes were happening at Marvel. In particular, Stan Lee was no longer editor-in-chief. He had been kicked upstairs to the role of publisher. He also wasn't writing comics anymore. This gave him freed up time so that he could go to college campuses and give lectures, so that he could give interviews about the hip and happening Marvel Universe, things that really kind of stroked his ego and that he enjoyed doing. The only writing he was doing was Stan's soapbox, 2 paragraphs of wit and wisdom, which Stan really considered his main forte. Now, the Marvel Universe was in great hands in the form of Roy Thomas, because nobody loved these characters and loved this universe more than Roy Thomas. But that still left a void. Somebody had to write their flagship title, and that brings us to Jerry Conway. Jerry Conway sold his first comic book strip at the age of 16. He wrote dozens of fill-in issues, DC Horror Mags, the House of Secrets, House of Mystery, things like that. By the early 70s, he was over at Marvel plying his trade, and he had become one of the best comic book writers in the business. And at Marvel, he wrote just about everybody. By 1973, he had written just almost every single comic that Marvel had published at one point or another. Now, at Spider-Man, he had taken over the book, but sales were starting to fall just a bit. Stan Lee was no longer there, and the book had been going now for more than 10 years. At a director's meeting, John Romita, who was now the art director for Marvel, suggested doing what Terry and the Pirates did. Now, Terry and the Pirates was the greatest adventure strip of all time, but anytime interest would lag, they had a device they could fall on easily, and that was kill a supporting character. So John Romita said, we got to do this, guys. It will totally revitalize the series. Roy Thomas suggested Aunt May, because Roy Thomas is a sensible and smart person, and that would have saved us decades of grief. But no, John Romita said, it's got to be somebody closer. It's got to be something that shakes up the status quo more. We've got to kill one of the girls, Mary Jane Watson or Gwen Stacy. Well, it took Jerry Conway about 3 seconds to decide between those two, because he hated Gwen Stacy. As he said in an interview, she was a non-entity, a pretty face. She brought nothing to the mix, end quote. They talked it over and decided that, honestly, that relationship had gone as far as it could possibly go, short of marriage, and they did not want to marry them. That would have changed the character of Peter Parker too much to still be Spider-Man. So they got Stan Lee's approval. He signed off on it, said, sure, go ahead, and they commenced to produce the issue. Spider-Man number 121 hit the stands and in many ways was an instant classic. This is one of the high points of the entire Marvel Universe, much less just the high point of Spider-Man's run. In case you don't know exactly how it went down, Green Goblin kidnaps Gwen Stacy, takes her to a bridge, also he can have a knockdown, drag-out fight with Spider-Man. But at the climax of the fight, he hurdles Gwen Stacy off the bridge. Spider-Man rushes to the edge, shouts no, shoots his web, catches Gwen Stacy mid-fall. But you'll notice that extra little sound effect right by her head that says, snap. Her neck is snapped, she's dead. You know this as they pull her up. Look at the angle of the head as they're pulling her body up. This was gruesome. This was terrifying stuff for 1963. But what it also was very definitive. There was no bringing Gwen Stacy back from this. So their problem was solved. And in the end, she was fridged. She basically was a character that was killed just to prop up hero progression. In the end, she served the same purpose that she had always served, and that was to prop up the character of Spider-Man. Problem solved, case closed, everything was done, we could now move on, right? Wrong. The Marvel readership went bonkers. All of a sudden, Marvel Comics started getting death threats in their fan mail. When Stan Lee would go to college campuses, he wouldn't even be able to give his lectures because he was getting so much hate from the audience on how dare you kill Gwen Stacy. To which he said, guys, I knew nothing about this. I had nothing to do with it because lying to save his own skin might very well have been in Stan Lee's skill set. But he promised him, don't worry, this is just a story. Gwen Stacy will be back. Why did people care so much if the character was not any better than that? Well, your readership for comics at this point was almost exclusively male, and it was tended to be a younger male, not the married men that kind of populate these days. And so while she might not have been the greatest of characters, what she was the perfect girlfriend. She was blonde. She was super nice. She loved and adored Peter Parker, and that's what every guy wanted in a girlfriend. The fact that she was kind of insubstantial as a character and as a person just didn't play as much into it. So Stan Lee casually told him in the offices, guys, you probably want to bring her back at some point. Jerry Conway did oblige. 2 years later, those go-go boots belong to Gwen Stacy. Except that they don't, because this is not Gwen Stacy. This is actually the clone of Gwen Stacy, because this was the start of the immortal Clone Saga. And we all know how that turned out. But while the Clone Saga may be reviled now, at the very least, it did definitively end Gwen Stacy. At the end of that series, we know she's not coming back. There is no more Gwen Stacy in Earth 616. And so we're done. We're done with Gwen Stacy. We can move on with our lives. Mary Jane Watson can take over the role for Spider-Man. Everything is good. And it is until 2014. In 2014, Spider-Man is being written by Dan Slott, and he's doing a great job. And in addition to his regular Spider-Man title, he's working on a series called Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse brings together all these alternate versions of Spider-Man from all the different universes that now populate the Marvel mythos. Now, a very popular book for Marvel through a lot of these years was one called What If? Now, What If would just take existing concepts that everybody was familiar with and invert them. What if the Avengers had never gone into being? What if Rick Jones had become the Hulk? There's a lot to be gained by taking a familiar concept and turning it on its head, completely inverting it. By subverting the familiar, you put a fresh coat of paint on a familiar concept and make it interesting again, at least in the short term. And so Dan Slott thought, why not Gwen Stacy as Spider-Man in one of these alternate universes? So, Earth 65. On Earth 65, Peter Parker is not bitten by a radioactive spider because on Earth 65, radioactive spiders prefer blondes, and instead it bites Gwen Stacy. There's two big fallouts from this. One is Peter Parker does not gain the proportionate speed and agility of a spider, and so he continues to be bullied and tormented by people at school. To get revenge on these, he becomes the Lizard. Now, Gwen Stacy, however, does gain the proportionate speed and agility of a spider, and also learns, just in that universe, with great power comes great responsibility. And so she takes on Peter Parker and tries to stop him. In the course of this, Peter Parker dies. Spider-Woman, as she's called at that point, gets blamed. But that's the start of what is going to be an incredible run of comics. Now, the first people they turned this series over to was Jason Latour as writer and Robbie Rodriguez. Now, Robbie Rodriguez did the art, which means he designed the iconic costume, absolutely earning the gratitude of cosplayers everywhere. Because as soon as this was released, you could not go to a comic convention without running into a dozen Spider-Gwens decked out in full hood and costume. Why did this character resonate so today when the character of Gwen Stacy was such a weak character before? Well, it's because we are different now as a people. Gwen Stacy, honestly, of the Spider-Gwen universe, is not the same Gwen Stacy from Earth 616. One thing she is not is Super Girlfriend. She does not exist to prop up any male character. If anything, the male characters now exist to prop up her. She's not a female Peter Parker, even though she shares some similarities with him. She does make wisecracks when they're fighting. She does have some of the same neuroses and hangups, but other than that, she completely has her own distinctive voice. Now, this makes her own sense of humor, her own personality, unique, and that's what's best about this. So, we've got Spider-Gwen. We've got Radioactive Spider-Gwen. We've got Ghost Spider, which is actually the most current series, all of which are valid takes of the character. And so in the end, what you ask is this interesting, is this a valid character since it's so derivative of Spider-Man? And the answer to that is resoundingly yes. For one thing, Gwen Stacy, she's in a band. Nothing is cooler than being in a band. She's in a band called the Mary Janes with Mary Jane Watson, Betty Brant, Glory Brant, and even better than that, she's the drummer. Because guys, the drummer is the coolest member of any band. Yes, somebody might have been a drummer in a band in high school. In the end, I'll leave you with this. Myths allow us to explore who we are at any given point in time. And they're going to change. They're not restricted to a single telling. The best myths have multiple versions. There's no one version that's the only valid version. The validity of each stands on its own merits. And so it's not for me to decide. It's for the people who read the book and enjoy it to decide if this myth stands on its own. And honestly, fans have said it does. And that's good enough for me. Everybody, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. You got other things you want me to broach? Let me know. Have a great day.